ideas that's compatible with embodiment. And that's it. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you, Nathan.
Okay.
Yep. We have time for questions. So, okay.
I was a bit confused by the place where it felt like there's a logical step from changing psi of u to like suddenly the belief the agent has about the environment rather than
Gotcha.
what it was initially. So if you could
Yeah.
elaborate on how we make that jump.
Yeah, sure thing. So, yeah, so the point is, yeah, I mean, this is really difficult. I was trying to not talk too much about the Dennett thing, but it's kind of unavoidable, really. So the point is that um, if you have something that updates consistently like this, right? You've got a function, any function that you've defined, where it maps states of the system to something that lives kind of in some world of semantics. If you've got such a function that is consistent in this way, then it's kind of reasonable. Like it's not it then it like it's at least consistent to attribute those beliefs to the agent itself, right? You say, I've got this function that says when the agent's in this state, it should have these beliefs. And so you just say, well, the agent, I'm just going to call that the agent's beliefs, right? The agent doesn't have to know anything about that function. It just has to, its dynamics just have to be consistent with it. And so what we have here, so yeah, here I was talking about Bayesian probabilities. Here we don't have any probabilities, but we have sets, right? So we're going to attribute beliefs to the agent that say, I think the environment is in either this state or this state or this state or this state, but not in any of the others, right? And so that's what we're going to treat psi of u as being. And I'm not trying to make any metaphysical claim that this really is what the agent believes. Like I'm really trying to avoid making any metaphysical claims whatsoever. But what I'm saying is that if you choose to do that, if you choose to say, I'm going to think that psi of u tells me what the agent's beliefs are as a function of the agent state, then that's a sensible thing to do. It's consistent. The agent will take actions that make sense if it had those beliefs, and it will update those beliefs in a way that makes sense according to what information it gets from the environment. Did that answer the question?
Hi, Nathaniel. Thanks for that. I'm going to, maybe it's a follow-up, I think, to the previous question. So I think what you've said might hold if the environment doesn't care about the organism. But if there are vectors in your space that, for example, are orthogonal to the user dimension, so things are changing, but the user is not changing, the environment is changing, then that doesn't seem, those changes don't seem to have anything to do with the agent's beliefs. And a second part is, if you imagine that things that are changing in the environment are doing so because they care about the organism. So imagine tiny infant steps out in front of a car. Mother grabs tiny infant and pulls it back. So that vector in your space will look like the agent has behaved in a reasonable way, updated its priors, and avoided getting outside of its viability zone. But really, the agent was behaving in a stupid way, and it was the mother that was saving it. But the mother is the environment, at least if you take a certain perspective on the system. How do you distinguish between those sorts of situations?
Cool. Yeah, thanks for that question. That really gives me a chance to say something substantial. So there were two questions there. One was what happens if there are variables or like kind of parts of the state space of the environment that just don't couple to the agent at all. And the other one was like, what if there are like benevolent things in the environment that just kind of do things for the agent so the agent doesn't have to do them? And I can speak to both of those. So the first one, what if there are things that don't couple to the agent? Well, then it's hard to draw in two dimensions, but like you've got to imagine like this picture has like a third dimension to it, and this whole like everything, or like I guess this picture gets a third dimension to it, and everything just gets extruded out into the third dimension, right? So what am I saying? I'm saying that if there's a variable in the environment that has no effect on the agent at all, then for every value of that variable, like if the states of the other variables are good, then for every value of this variable, it will also be good. That wasn't super clear, I realize, but the upshot of it is that the beliefs you attribute to the agent are basically, I don't care about that variable. It could be anything. It doesn't make any difference to me. Like my beliefs about it are just that it can be anything at all. So that kind of gets taken care of, like that kind of gets taken care of automatically. The agent doesn't care, or at least has the option not to care about things that don't affect it, right? The other one is, yeah, what if the mother looks after the baby and we count the mother as part of the environment? What beliefs does the baby have? Well, there's like a weird thing here, like why are you attributing sophisticated beliefs to a baby? But what comes out if you work through examples like that is that basically the baby just believes the mother will take care of it, right? So the baby doesn't have a belief about whether there's a car or what the mother will do. But the baby believes that if there is a car, then the mother will take care of it. And you can sort of work through examples which actually do sort of say that. But of course, you also have the option to draw the boundary differently, right? Which is the point at the end. Like you could say, well, okay, this is baby, and the baby believes that the mother and the environment are coupled in such a way that the mother will prevent bad things from happening. But maybe that's a weird, nonsensical thing to attribute to the baby's beliefs. It probably doesn't really believe anything of that sophistication. But you could also split it up like this, where the baby and the mother are the agent and the environment. The rest of the world is the environment, and then maybe that partition will make more sense, right? But the framework kind of tells you how to relate the two, or like that's the hope. Was that good? Sort of weird because I can't see or hear anyone, so I just sort of have to hope that was a satisfying answer.
Sorry, I gave my microphone away before you finished your answer.
Okay.
Yeah, I think so. I think the first question, I think I could ask it in a slightly different way, but I'm going to hand this over to the next questioner. Thank you.
Thanks for that talk. I'm also excited about a more formal definition of goals, and it seems like there's maybe a couple of components that also could be brought into this. So goals and competence, I think, go together. You can either say an agent, as an external observer, you can say an agent is trying to accomplish a goal, but it's not doing it very well, or it's actually trying to accomplish some set of goals and it's doing really well at that. So it seems like goals and competence are somehow mutually defining. I'm curious whether you model that in any way.
I don't have anything that I can say formally about that, but there is the point here in this idea of intertwinedness that the R might be complex even though the viable region is simple, which kind of like there's a sort of vague idea that Martin mentioned in the introduction that like attributing a goal to a system is kind of a good idea if that goal kind of either helps you predict the system really well or kind of just like kind of gives you some insight, like tells you a lot about the system. And I kind of feel this idea of competence is related to that, in that saying this person is trying to do this and they're really good at it kind of tells you a lot more about what they're going to do than saying maybe. I'm not sure actually. I don't know the answer to that question. I think it's a good question though.
Thank you.
Okay, we're gonna take one last one because
so I was wondering about this choice of boundary, because just intuitively, I would think that some boundaries are a lot more meaningful and sensible in the way that we think about life and goal-directedness. And if you change the boundary, both the dynamical system changes, as I understand it, and also the interpretation maps that are associated with that system and that boundary. Do you have any idea yet if there are some qualitative or quantitative differences in especially the interpretation maps that would allow some sort of interpretation of what degree of goal-directedness is going on in this case?
I mean, it's difficult. So just like the way I described it here, at least, changing the boundary doesn't actually change the dynamical system at all, right? Like the physics is the same. You're just choosing what to put in one box and what to put in another box. But it does change the interpretation map because it changes like it has a different domain and a different codomain. It's interpreting a different thing. Now, I don't have anything like I'd love to be able to say, aha, yes, we can quantify like how much it makes sense to draw the boundary here versus here, or like maybe not quantify, but say concrete things. Kind of don't really have that. But we do have a bunch of examples where you can draw the boundary in different places, and you can kind of say, oh yeah, okay, if I draw the boundary here, then I say this thing believes this, and if I draw the boundary here, I say this thing believes this, and they do both make sense, and I can kind of see how they relate. So yeah, the hope is that we will eventually that by thinking along these lines, we'll get what you're asking for, basically. That you know, because intuitively, some places like it doesn't make sense to draw the boundary. Like, you know, half my brain and half my body are in one thing, and then the rest of my body, and then also the chair over there is another thing. Like some places, some things don't make sense, and some things do make sense. And there must be a reason why some boundaries make more sense than others. But right now, I don't have anything really formal or concrete that I can say about it, but I do hope to have that at some point.
Thank you.
Thank you, Nathaniel. We're gonna go to the next speaker, which is Casssandra. And you have 10 minutes and 5 questions.
Hi, everyone. So I'm here to talk about agency. Before I start, just as a quick show of hands, who here is not a professional philosopher? Okay, so I've removed the word transcendental from this presentation, but this is going to be a philosophical talk. Hopefully, it's not going to be anything technical, so I just want to say some thought-provoking things about some different philosophical theories about how we can explain goal-directed behavior. I'm going to suggest some problems with these different views and then suggest a way forward. So what I want to talk about when I say agency is I just mean that agents are things which act autonomously on the basis of their own goals. And I contrast that with things which are in some sense passive, things which react, things which are caused by things, but are in some sense not, they don't act for their own goals. They don't have goals that are proprietary to them and things like that. And so I'm going to consider these 3 different philosophical approaches, one to do with self-organization, one to do with mental representation, and a third to do with ecological dynamics. I'm going to suggest some problems with these views, and I'm going to then propose an alternative, which we'll call the inactive approach. And just to foreshadow, I mean, this is basically what I'm going to suggest at the end of this talk. I'm going to say, look, there's this important link between goal-directedness and motivation. There's this link between motivation and sentience is going to turn out to be very biological. So that's where we're heading. And I'm just going to talk about this stuff because we don't have a lot of time. So these are the desiderata I'm going to extract from my criticisms, but I'll just get to these as I go along rather than linger on them here. So let's start by talking about self-organization. So this approach tries to explain agency by looking at what's special about the self-organizing structure of living systems. So we note that living systems are precarious self-organizing. So they're self-organizing in the sense that they generate themselves, they generate the components that distinguish them from the environment as individuals. And they're precarious in the sense that they disintegrate should their activity cease or be sufficiently disrupted. And the thought is that this gives rise to intrinsic goals for the system insofar as there are some states of affairs that are good for it, those that contribute to its self-production, and there are some that are bad for it, those which are detrimental to its continued self-production. And so Masayo and Beek, for instance, tell us that the organization of biological systems is inherently goal-directed because the system's activity is directed towards the continued self-production of the system. And so just as an example of this, I mean, we have the autopoietic organization of the cell. I'm not going to linger on this for time reasons, though. Now, here's what I think is the problem with this approach. I worry that it risks eliminating goal-directedness or what's important about goal-directedness. So it seems like when we're talking about self-organization in this way, the goal is just kind of a description or a summary of the circular causal regime. So we have this causal process, which tends to maintain this outcome of the continued self-production of the system. And the goal as such isn't in any way adding anything to our explanation of the system's behavior. It's just kind of a gloss on what the system's doing. And so that's my first objection. Okay. Second approach, so we talked about mental representation. And so on these views, we can say that agents are systems whose behavior is governed by thought, meaning that their behavior is explained by the representational contents of their mental states. What do I mean by that? So imagine we have a squirrel in this environment and it has this goal. It wants to get the golden acorn. So for this goal, the squirrel's behavior to be goal-directed, the squirrel has to have these mental representations in its head. It has a representation of the environment, a representation of the goal, and it has knowledge about how to attain this goal in this environment. And so the behavior is goal-directed when it flows in the appropriate way from the tokenings of these mental representations. The worry I have about this is that it seems like a really cognitively sophisticated thing that we're attributing to these systems. It seems like you have to have concepts and then inferences over these concepts. I don't know that any non-human animals are really doing this. And so if that's our theory of goal-directed behavior, then it's going to rule out what seems to be like all the paradigm cases of goal-directedness in the world. So that is bad. So objection 2. The third theory we're going to talk about is these ecological theories. And so these theories don't stipulate anything about the internal structure of the system. They don't tell us anything about its cognitive makeup. They just try to explain goal-directedness in terms of the dynamical embedding of the system in its environment. And so particularly, behavior is going to count as goal-directed when it depends counterfactually on goals. So what do I mean by that? Let's return to our squirrel. So the squirrel has this goal, and given this environment, it's going to produce some behavior which is conducive to attaining this goal given the environment. And if the goal were to vary in some way, then the squirrel's behavior is also going to vary in some flexible way to achieve whatever that goal is. And similarly, if the environment were to change in some way, then because the squirrel's behavior is tracking this particular goal, once again, we'll have variable behavior that's always tracking this goal in the environment. Now, what I worry about this is that this is going to be too permissive of an account of agency. And particularly the worry I have is that we need to distinguish intrinsic and extrinsic goal-directedness, or we need to distinguish real agents from what we can call imposters. You're supposed to laugh at this, by the way. Maybe it's been too many years since the Among Us craze. And so what I have in mind is just any system that's guided by feedback is what I have in mind as an imposter. So you have something like a target-seeking torpedo. It's going to have these appropriate goal-directed dynamics. So it's going to, its behavior will track the target. As the environment changes, its behavior will change in suitable ways to continue its pursuit of the target. But it seems like there's this important distinction between what the torpedo is doing as compared to what, say, an animal is doing. And it's that the torpedo has my goals or the goals of whoever operates it, the engineers, whereas organisms seem to have goals that are in some way proprietary to them. And I think we need some way to latch onto this distinction. So there's problem number 3. And so here's basically what I've tried to extract from that discussion is we want our theory of agency to do these three things. We don't want to eliminate agency. We don't want it to be too high of a bar for animals to clear. And we also want to make sure that it respects this important proprietariness of goals. And so I'm going to suggest that we can do this. So this approach, the enactive approach, is in some sense, I'm going to suggest it unifies these three prior approaches I've mentioned, kind of preserving what's good about them, getting rid of what's bad about them. So we start with an appreciation of what is important about self-organization. So as we noted, the self-organizing structure of living systems gives rise to these intrinsic norms to do with biological viability. But then I think there's this further question we should ask. Once you have norms in the picture, so you're able to distinguish between genuine agents and imposters in that way, what's required of a system in order to pursue its norms adaptively so that it actually maintains its viability? And so what I want to suggest is that the organism needs to have, or the system needs to have, a perspective which has certain features. So particularly, its perspective on the world needs to involve the system being partial to beneficial states of affairs as opposed to detrimental states of affairs. And it has to have some kind of motivation or sense of urgency with how it behaves. So if it's about to die, it has to have some urgency with which it avoids that. If it has competing goals, there has to be some way that its behavior is going to track the importance of these different things. And so we should ask then, well, what's required? What does the system need in order to approach its goals with this kind of motivation and urgency? And the suggestion then is that what's going to do this is something like affect for the system. And so by affect, I just mean something like the subjective experience of positive or negative value. I mean something that's broader than emotion per se, but it's the kind of thing which connotes positive or negative value. That's good, that's bad, that's pleasant, that's unpleasant. And so what it seems like affect does is it attracts you to the pleasant things, repels you from the repulsive things. It directs your attention towards things based on this distribution of their affective salience. And so it seems like this is kind of what will allow us to make this link between having goals and then pursuing them in this motivated way. So here's basically the picture I want to suggest. I want to say that we need something more than self-organization. We need something more than ecological dynamics to explain what it is that makes behavior goal-directed. And that needs to be some sort of cognitive or psychological aspect, but I want to keep that kind of psychology something that's affordable. I don't want it to be something that's too demanding. And so I'm suggesting that instead of saying that goal-directed behavior requires governance by thought, we throw that out. We say instead it's governance by affect. And so the thought is, instead of needing these sophisticated things like propositions, concepts, and so on and so forth, what you need just to have this kind of proprietary goal-directedness, which explains your behavior as being goal-directed, is just something like experiencing things as pleasant or unpleasant. And here on the side, I think we can kind of have a top-down and a bottom-up way of looking at this. So from the bottom up, you have biological self-organization, which gets you intrinsic norms. Then there's a question, though, about the pursuit of norms, which is explained by affective attunement to the environment, and that's what explains goal-directed behavior. And then from the top down, you have goal-directed behavior, which is insensitive to the distinction between genuine agency and imposters. So that gets explained by the affective attunement to the environment, and that then is cashed out in terms of biological norms of viability. That's all I'm going to talk about, but yeah, so I think we've gotten a successful theory. Thanks for your time.